with someone saying, wow, you have problems you probably ought to deal with at some point. Tune in next week to see if we do. The problem is, when you come down to it, Doctor Who is about visiting other worlds and going on fun adventures. Moffat made it all about the Doctor. In much the same way, the Sherlock Holmes stories are about solving crimes and fun mysteries and figuring things out using deductive reasoning. Moffat made his show all about Sherlock. Sherlock is too important, too special, too powerful, and this ruins the tension of the show and our ability to empathise with the character. The entire show is dedicated to telling you about Sherlock instead of showing you Sherlock by way of his interaction with the actual plot. Season 1 was the only season that came close to getting this right, where you learned what sort of person he was and his abilities based on how he used them in the episode. As the show progresses, the actual mystery, the crimes we're supposed to have fun watching Sherlock solve, take a back seat to the show telling us how cool and wacky Sherlock is, and his mind battle with Moriarty. In this episode in Season 3, there's a huge setup just for Sherlock being weird. They spend a pretty sizable portion of the runtime and budget for a quick joke about how rude and thoughtless Sherlock is, where Lestrade is gearing up to capture someone who's clearly been a problem with him for a long time.
I have to go.
Do you know any funny stories about John?
They could have just made him rude and thoughtless over the course of the plot of the actual fucking episode. The punchline of these jokes is supposed to set up something regarding the principal characters, but they do it so poorly and in such a roundabout way that they're neither funny nor really tell us anything new. We should already know Sherlock is a big inconsiderate piece of shit because Moffat has been writing him as one for 3 seasons at this point. This kind of overindulgent nonsense is antithetical to actually telling an interesting story. Nothing remotely like this would have happened in the short stories because they actually had a story worth telling and wanted to get to it. Cumulatively, stuff like this reduces the entire show to Sherlock prancing around, showing off how smart and or rude he is, and very occasionally pausing to do something.
I'll get hung for this.
No, Mr. Buick, not at all. Hanged? Yes.
Sherlock corrects a guy's grammar a bunch for the first 2 minutes of this episode and then walks away. This doesn't serve the story at all, except to tell us that Sherlock doesn't like when you say words wrong. Which is, an admirable character trait, obviously. Fuck that guy, he deserves to die even if he didn't do the murder. But it's really not something so pivotal as to be the start of an episode. It's a show about solving crimes. The episode should be starting with a crime, a thing happens that piques your interest, like the first 2 episodes did. But by the time of the 3rd episode, we open on Sherlock being shitty, dramatically walking out, and the credits go, and we cut to Sherlock being shitty in his house for another 3 minutes. Ooh, there's a head in the fridge, how wacky! The actual start of the episode's fucking plot is at around 6 minutes 20 seconds when someone suddenly attacks the house out of nowhere. Well, that is Sherlock being bored and smart and literally waiting around for the plot to come together. Now this characterization isn't utterly terrible. We do have a strong sense of Sherlock this is that in effect, the entire show is bent towards providing characterization for Sherlock and making the story he's interacting with take a back seat until it becomes convenient. In the actual books and many of the adaptations, Sherlock Holmes was not the real focal point. The mystery at hand and the other characters were equally as important, and the point was the way Sherlock interacted with them to help solve the case. Let's take the very first story, A Study in Scarlet. Sherlock, while examining the body, refers to pre-existing events he's already studied, and actively recommends others do the same. Instead of simply telling everyone how smart he is, he makes a tangible reference to a piece of information that could be relevant. We're seeing his reasoning in action. We're also getting strong characterization while the plot moves forward of Sherlock checking the body and making comments that teach us about Sherlock and about the case. Characterization and story are happening at the same time and not in separate segments the first 6 minutes before the story begins to start. Lestrade assumes R.A.C.H. written in blood on a wall are meant to say Rachel, and the killer was disturbed before they could finish writing, and that someone called Rachel therefore has something to do with the case. That's all he gets from this scene, the assumption that these words might say Rachel, which he totally avoids. Sherlock looks at this scene and deduces, for example, the approximate height of the person who wrote the message based on where it had made sense for them to write the letters. Something no one else in the room thought to observe and consider, something that you could absolutely arrive at yourself. This is a tangible piece of information that you yourself could apply to real life. Sherlock just taught you how to figure out how tall someone is based on how they would naturally write on a wall or the length of the stride of their footprints. This characterization is very strong because it gets across that Sherlock is smart, but also why he's smart, what he did to learn the things he learned, and got across the point of the scene, which is to demonstrate the use of his analytical techniques. For comparison, there's a scene in the first Sherlock episode, A Study in Pink, which again get it? How clever! Where Sherlock goes to a crime scene clearly based on the one from Scarlet. Rach here is written by the victim, and it actually turns out that she really is trying to write the name Rachel, because knowing German, I guess, is too much to expect of an audience. This isn't necessarily a bad change. What is a bad change is what information Sherlock learns and how he learns it. We're shown Sherlock inspecting the body and instead making the conclusion, based on the inside of a dirty wedding ring being clean, that the woman is a serial adulterer. This actually doesn't have very much impact on the story whatsoever, it's just the writers finding a way to be clever by having Sherlock derive an entire sexual history from a ring. He then realises something no one else notices and dramatically runs off, screaming, "Pink!" This is totally utter. Instead of being given tangible explanation, deciding what to do next with the information, told to assume someone's marriage is failing because the ring is dirty. Sherlock knows something you don't, and has just run off to deal with it himself. The tone here is utter confusion. Sherlock's smart because he figured something out, but we're not going to say what, or how, or why. Just for contrast, the first time we see CBS's Elementary's Sherlock on the crime scene, he discovers a hidden room by feeling the incline of the floor with his feet.
The extra weight of a safe room steel reinforcements can cause the floor around it to decline. One and five degrees.
This thing with the marble is clever and based on quite simple available information, like the big armoured paratroops are hidden. It's not rocket science, it's a believable deduction, and it did just teach you an actual real-life way of finding hidden panic rooms. This show might not be perfect, but at least they solve crimes using information they detected, like detectives would. This early scene is the best analysis in the show you're gonna get, too. You are shown pieces of information that lead to a conclusion. For example, he recognises that she would have had to have a suitcase with her because of splash marks, which the viewer's even shown and has a chance to figure out for themselves before Sherlock explains it. But in most investigations after this one, Sherlock starts either making wild assumptions that don't have any basis in reality, or straight up learns key information the viewer isn't even told about. In episode 2, Sherlock assumes a man found with a gunshot on the right side of his head couldn't be self-inflicted because he was left-handed.
Wounds on the right side of his head. Banker was left-handed. Requires quite a bit of contortion.
This isn't even a solid assumption. In practice, plenty of left-handed people use their other hand for firearms so that the kickback of the weapon doesn't potentially injure the hand you use for writing with, including, say, for example, John Watson. Bing. In episode 3, Sherlock has to figure out how a TV personality lady was poisoned. He sends Watson to the lady's house and we get scenes of him checking stuff out and Sherlock starting to watch a few episodes and check the internet for theories. The characters meet up and Sherlock just sort of throws out there that the houseboy who is in a relationship with the lady's brother probably poisoned her in revenge for mistreatment of the brother on TV based on all the research he did off screen. All we see of this research is her patting him a little bit too hard on the back. Sherlock proves this theory by having a toxicology report come in and show it was botulinum toxin and that the houseboy's job was to give her Botox and that he knows he's been bulk ordering it.
My contact at the Home Office gave me the complete records of Rouse and by this time.
That's right. In a show about solving crimes, you have a sense of unfolding mystery and giving them some information so they can try and figure it out for themselves, so their brain is engaged. Sherlock solves the crime off screen, information the viewer's never shown or has a chance to deduce for themselves. He just comes out of nowhere and reveals it was Botox and that he has a friend with the power to find out people's internet purchases and share them with him. The ability to be intelligent in finding and interpreting available information is replaced with a superpower where he holds all the cards and knows more than the viewer possibly could, rendering the experience of trying to follow the story roughly similar to trying to figure out where a car is driving while there's a bag over your head and Stephen Moffat is punching you and insisting he's being clever. In this same episode, based on a guard being found dead who works in a gallery, he immediately then arrives at the conclusion that there has to be fate, because why else would anyone ever be killed? And then concludes based on circumstantial evidence that a well-known legendary hitman we've never heard of before must have done it. And then someone off-screen finds out where he is, and then they go to where he is.
Any time you can explain? Over this network. Really?
Like, all the deduction and thinking isn't done done in a way that is actually interesting or fun for the viewer to see. How would a person track this hitman? How would you find out where he is? That's an interesting story. They skip over it. Sherlock literally hires someone else to do it, and they do all of this so that Sherlock and Watson have an excuse to run around chasing a really tall guy and then having a wrestle with him. You know, yeah, the original stories were fantastic and groundbreaking pieces of literature about the bit where the main characters wrestle a tall guy for a while. I'll say again that the show does start out better, and lots of season 1 does feature some genuine deduction based on information that comes in some show. The deductive reasoning this earlier show would be centered about is replaced with a told later how clever Sherlock was. It tells you about all the other stuff you didn't even know about that led into it. In The Hounds of Baskerville, Sherlock intentionally tries to drug Watson with what he thinks is sugar that's got hallucinogen added to it, based on how he thinks he's been drugged, and it's the only thing they didn't both consume. The fact it's the one thing they haven't both eaten or drunk isn't established until after Watson has been given the sugar and started hallucinating. The purpose of this part appears to be to make Sherlock look clever for knowing something we didn't even have the chance to think about for ourselves. Also, he could have just tested the sugar instead of trying to drug his friend with an unknown chemical to see what would happen and then testing it later, only to discover the sugar is clean. You can even imagine a better, smarter show having a section where the two stop and think about everything they've eaten, maybe even cutting back to see everything they ate, because they could have had scenes of them doing that as other stuff happened, and eliminating everything except the sugar, then testing it out and discovering it's normal. Instead, all this information is excised on purpose so you can have the mystery of Sherlock maybe drugging his only friend and fill some precious time collecting a lab from an imaginary dog for 5 whole minutes. The story it would have made sense to tell is just too normal for Moffat and Gatiss. The real focus is what wacky or cool thing Sherlock will personally do, and then how he'll justify it later using bullshit, instead of being on the piece of evidence or information and the proper approach to finding it and acting on it. This conveniently lets the writers off the hook for ever having to deal with things like character, motivation, or choices. When you read a chapter of a Sherlock Holmes story, you feel like you've gotten a little bit smarter. It feels weird to say out loud, but often it's like you've personally seen the benefit of a certain way of looking at the world. Sherlock has the strongest characterization in the
you as it has all that it has touched. Have you heard enough? Are you a man of action? This madness must come to an end. The age of the immortals has long since passed. Destroy the guardians surrounding the pylons to lower the force field. When this is done, destroy Immerthal. With the prince's power greatly reduced, attack and end. Lay the spirits of the sun to rest, adventurer.
Sign me the fuck up. By now, you probably know what a speedrun is already. It's where players commit to beating a game as fast as possible. On the surface, it's a bit silly. People sitting down with one game, playing it over and over, dedicating immense time and effort to learning its ins and outs, and learning skills that probably aren't all that helpful anywhere else. And yet, somehow, the experience of taking part in or even watching someone try to speedrun a game is exhilarating and amazing and just fun. And speedruns of some games frequently get millions of views. This clearly matters to a lot of people. So there's probably a reason why, and I was having trouble scratching at the reasons why, so I arrived at the obvious solution of writing a YouTube video about it. Speedrunning is really fun to watch, and stories about speedrunning are consistently fascinating, and I really want to talk about why, and no one's managed to stop me so far. It's generally accepted that the Souls series is pretty difficult, and they are, at least for beginners, because the games are generally not great at teaching you how to really grasp playing them. I've heard there's already a video out there somewhere that drones on and on for way too long trying to explain this, so we'll ignore that here. This difficulty is the prime reason why speedruns of games in this series are so entertaining to watch. Owing to the game's inaccessibility and the good, as it were, watching someone blast through them is just plain fun. What's interesting in a more in-depth way about speedruns, though, is seeing how they develop over time, and Dark Souls is a perfect example of why. Part 1. Development. The earliest speedrun on record at speedruns.com, a fantastic resource by the way, for Dark Souls, is by Japanese runner Twilight. In 2011, a lot less was known about how Dark Souls really ticked, and there was yet to be much of a community to help pick away at all the possible fastest approaches to the game. So Twilight's run consists largely of combining general tricks that were widely known early on for making the game easier or faster. For example, in Dark Souls, there are multiple different starting classes with their own stats, starting items, and abilities. While some do have unique advantages, the Pyromancer starts with the ability to throw fireballs, something none of the others can actually do for quite a while, so it's usually the one round, because if they're having trouble fighting, they can throw fire on people. I mean, come on, so Twilight picks them. It's not really a surprise, it's kind of the obvious choice that people would think about in this game. The next players can choose. Normally in Dark Souls, players have to go through a fairly tough area, fight a difficult boss to get a key to another difficult area, then fight another boss there to progress through to another difficult area in the White Town, which leads now to another boss which is the game. But for reasons, the developers made one of the starting items players can choose from a key to the starting area, which skips past two of those bosses right into the So it's pretty clear what item a speedrunner would want to start with. It's just the most obviously fast and helpful choice. I mean, look at the other one. Binoculars, a rubbish ring, more rubbish ring, pendant, trinkets, no effect, black firebombs? What a garbage option. Why would anyone ever pick that? I don't know, I guess they're pretty good. I mean, they're more deadly than STD bomb. What? Another initially obvious trick for speedrunning involves this Drake that turns up early on and hangs out up here. Getting a decent weapon in this game usually takes some time. But once you get to this big scary boy, one recommended way for new players to get an advantage so they don't have too hard a time starting out is to sit in a safe place and spam arrows at its tail until it breaks off, giving you this sword. The Drake sword deals a ridiculous amount of damage for the place in the game where you can get it. It drops off in its usefulness quite quickly, but for early players it's just a fantastic weapon. But instead of wasting time with arrows, which they had dodged behind it when it jumped down and cut its tail off and then ran to the next area. This is one of the most cathartic things you can see in a speedrun. You spend a bunch of time dying to its fire and being kicked to death, and then you see someone else just steal its tail and run away with it and proceed to beat you for the rest of the game. It's great. A lot of Twilight's early run consists of playing the game the way one normally would, but just doing more running and ignoring enemies. Early runs like this play the game basically as normal, but very quickly and precisely, doing the most obviously easy and fast moves. Twilight burns all the remaining bosses with their hot hands and grabs enough humanity that they can feed it to the Daughter of Chaos and open a shortcut past all the major fire-based bosses, which obviously would take a long time to fight when all your weapons are fire. Have you ever tried actually fighting fire with fire? I'm on a watch list now. After a lot of running past things and killing bosses, they gather the 4 Lord Souls required to open the big door to the remnants of Great Uncle Gwyn's mega weekend barbecue and kill him so someone can finally call the fire department, and they do it in 1 hour and 26 minutes in in-game time. This is an ungodly fast speed to finish Dark Souls, but there was a lot of improvement to make. What I think is interesting about the early runs through the game is that they weren't just improving on execution of the same route or finding slightly more improved paths, but the nature of the entire route from the very start was still up for debate. Nothing was set in stone, even what type of character you chose to play as, and it wasn't clear what the fastest way would really be, and that's a really fun experimental period in the development of a speedrun. This is where Dark Souls runs excel in the spectatorship aspect. In lots of other games, you don't have as much choice or freedom in where to go, what sort of character to play, or what weapon to use. There are so many other paths or decisions that could have been made in a Souls game that the next run threatens to be completely different. And, well, it was. The next world record was set 3 months later and has gone on to be the longest standing world record, lasting 13 months. It was set by another Japanese runner, Keita. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Ke, and then it's elongated, so Keita. Alright, what's really fun about this run was it diverged from Twilight's path immediately. Not only do they start the game with a different class right out of the gate, but once they make it to Filing Shrine and you assume their run is going to be similar looking but with slight improvements, they get up and immediately head in the opposite direction. Goes to parts of the game Twilight never even sees in their run. Firstly, they go to the Valley of Drakes, dodge between the drakes, and grab the red Tearstone ring, which boosts the player's damage output by roughly 66% when they're below 20% health. By playing more riskily, Keita becomes much more dangerous. This is the kind of improvement I love seeing in speedruns, learning to abuse a risk-reward mechanic to just get the rewards by simply playing really well. In a speedrun, a risk-reward item can very frequently become a reward. Then they run into Darkroot Basin and encounter the Black Knight there. Now, Black Knights are tough enemies in the early game. They don't take much damage even when you riposte or backstab them. You can see this is going to take quite... Oh, he's pushed him off the cliff. Is rewarded with the Black Knight Halberd. You only get this weapon for killing the knight like 20% of the time, and these knights don't respawn. This halberd forms the basis of Keita's strategy, so if they don't get the halberd here, they would have to start the run again. There are definitely countless runs on the cutting room floor that ended here just because. You can slightly increase the chance of it dropping if you have more humanity on you, but it's still like a crapshoot. Now, there's a reason the last thing you fight before the final boss is a Black Knight with a halberd. Gwyn knew what was up. This weapon is enemies and bosses. Then they just keep going and run all the way around to the Darkroot Basin entrance to the Undead Parish, skipping several areas completely. After beating the gargoyles with a regular old axe, they use the souls they've gained to level up enough to equip the halberd, which they can now just about wield if they two-hand it. Keita had precisely figured out the most efficient way to get the souls they needed to use this weapon as early as possible. This means they're able to utterly destroy the fire bosses that Twilight had to skip completely because of their weapons. It's literally faster for Keita to run through all this and kill all these bosses than it is to gather the materials required to just skip them. Overall, Keita saved 15 entire minutes over Twilight while killing more bosses. Most of the current record holders in Dark Souls use this basic strategy now, but they've saved even more time by discovering new holes in the game to exploit, like by messing with the camera system enough to go out of bounds and enter Sen's Fortress early. They've improved the strategy so much that they don't even use the master key anymore. Instead, they use What a garbage. Why would anyone ever pick that? I just shouldn't be allowed to talk about Dark Souls anymore. Someone should just fucking come and stop me before I make a motherfucking idiot of myself. Could someone please stop me talking about Dark Souls? This just goes to show how much a run can develop. The once really obvious main choices of Pyromancer, Master Key, and Drakesword have all in turn been superseded. The creation and development of new runs through games is really, really fun to watch, but in a way that's hard to describe. It's a kind of logistical fun? Is that a kind of fun? That doesn't sound like a kind of fun. It reminds me of the feeling I got when I had my GPS out and it told me to take a route through a park that I knew really well. And I was like, nah, I can go through that faster. And I walked a different route and I got through it faster. It just felt amazing. It's a bit like the feeling I got when I decided I was going to do my taxes 8 months early. Have you ever done your taxes early? Speedrunning is for you! Welcome, friend! Huh. Great play, Mark. It's a real killer. Pathologic is one of the best and smartest games that's ever been made. And you know that's true because no one's played it. Okay, that's not quite accurate. A fair amount of people have tried to play it. The Steam release has achievements, and there's an achievement for surviving the first of the 12 in-game days. A day lasts about 2 hours. According to its global gameplay stats page, just 13.2% of all players made it that far. The achievement for day 1 is called I'm Not Dead. It's just that kind of game. It occupies a certain kind of space in game criticism. Some game critics, mostly the ones who are good, will sing its praises day and night, call it the best game you've never played, argue it's a shining bastion of everything gaming could be but often isn't, and labour very intensely to explain why games don't have to be fun to be good. Journalist, board game critic, and wizard Quentin Smith wrote 3 incredible articles about it in 2008 for Rock Paper Shotgun, which are probably hugely responsible for a lot of Western awareness of the game. But when someone reads articles like these, they might make the horrendous mistake of actually trying to play it, and we all know it's just not fun. It's not interesting to look at. It doesn't feel good to play mechanically. It's frustrating. The story is confusing and wordy and translated from Russian by a mystical rat who only speaks in riddles. It lacks almost anything that would normally keep a person playing a game. And yet, people keep saying it's great. I think it's great too. It's an incredible game that barely anyone will have the resilience to actually play long enough to appreciate, and that's maybe even the point. So, this time on the assorted mess of unrelated concepts that can scarcely be called a YouTube channel, I'm going to talk about all the things I find particularly interesting about this game and what they bring to making it so unique. I'm also going to talk about the problems it has that prevented it from seeing mainstream success, and then give a spirited defense of half of those problems anyway in the name of their artistic value. It's not a bad game, it's an amazing game. But it's also a bad game. It's a major time investment too. In many ways, it's a more interesting game to discuss than play. It's possible that Pathologic only exists so that we may speculate about it. So, in a way, making this video is really for my benefit more than yours. I played over 60 hours of this thing. I have almost 600 gigs of Pathologic footage on my hard drive. I get to make a video about it! That was the deal! Part 1. What is Pathologic? Probably should have gone in the intro. On the surface, it's a very easy game to explain. Pathologic is a first-person survival horror RPG with story-rich and atmospheric. Doesn't it look fun? It's set in a town deep in the Russian steppe at some ambiguous point. And by ambiguous, I mean imaginary. There are guns with a kind of old-time guns. A lot of the data is from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, but there's some baroque buildings lying around. The town is built around its meters. But the abattoir is some kind of huge, ancient building fused with the earth, and its workers live in a huge housing complex that looks nothing like the rest of the town. And some buildings are actively impossible, like these staircases to nowhere. And then there's the polyhedron, a giant floating tower that cannot be, sticking out of the earth, suspended by unknown means, and made partially out of its own blueprints. So, yeah, I'd say the time period's pretty ambiguous. You play as one of 3 different kinds of doctor who each arrive in the town for their own reasons. Just at the beginning of the outbreak of a horrible plague that threatens the entire town, and probably the world. The doctors have 12 days to get their shit together, save the town, and somehow survive long enough to do it. In some ways, it's kind of an immersive
next.
As soon as you hit New Game, it becomes clear that any simple description of its basic genre conventions doesn't capture how the game actually feels. The three playable characters, the Bachelor, the Haruspex, and the Changeling, aren't simply chosen by a menu.
So, it's all about trickery to you? Wherever have you come from?
No. I detest trickery. But if we ourselves are to suffer deception, our hands are no longer tied. Where are we?
We open in a theatre, which you actually visit in the game world later, looking down on all three characters as they argue on stage over who is best suited to solving the problem.
I can do miracles. Just let me.
Will you please be quiet?
The dialogue gets across each character's basic viewpoint. It's also written in a strangely theatrical way.
The truth is my shepherd. I will perform the operation. Medical.
Don't you go all bossy on me. Gentle hand to the surgeon.
Your gentle hands are not keeping life. You will inevitably do harm. As for Brady, he has no regard for casualties at all.
It sounds written, it's not even trying to be natural. It's like you're watching bad actors stumbling through their lines while rehearsing for a play, which you are. The actual play is about to begin with you playing as one of them. They conclude they can't work together and time is of the essence, and the house lights go down.
We won't have to. The sooner the better.
Let's go.
When you go to leave the theatre, then you get to choose which one you play. Even before the game started, the presentation is strangely brings in ideas of performance and theatrical. It's definitely the weirdest character selection experience. You can't play as the Changeling until you finish the game as one of the first two, but frankly, if you're actually going to play the game more than once, you should play both of the first two first, and really you ought to start with the Bachelor. He's regarded as the default pathologic experience, he's slightly easier, and his character is an outsider from the town, so you learn more about it from that perspective. The Bachelor, Daniil Dankovsky, is a Bachelor of Medicine. He's working on the ultimate utopian project a doctor can aspire to, defeating death itself. It's not going well. The powers that be, the government I guess, are shutting down his lab unless he can come up with something substantive to back up his ideas. He's come to the town because he's heard that a man who lives there, Simon Kane, has lived a remarkably long life, so maybe he can learn something about defeating death from him. Your quest log has the main mission for that day, the side quests for that day, and your overall mission, which for the Bachelor is saving his career, and maybe all human life, by learning how to defeat death inside. So you go to meet him, and you learn from Simon's brother Georgie that he died right before you got there. Oh. Well, Georgie asks you to help him find out who or what killed him. Luckily, you think you have a lead on how he died, because he met with a town community leader beforehand, and he was a respected local cultural figure and the town's head doctor of sorts. So they might have discussed his health or who might have wanted him dead. So you go to meet him, and he's dead too. People are speculating about a serial killer or a demonic steppe creature of myth, the Shabnak being responsible, and then you start to notice signs of a plague, and it it probably killed both of them and is about to kill everyone else. Days and days as the lives of people in the town and survival get worse and worse, that original quest, Dankovsky's bright-eyed, naive mission to defeat death itself on his way to meet a dead man, will stare you in the face every time you open your menu and check your mission. For Dankovsky, this message doesn't update when saving himself or the town become his priority. For the rest of your sad life, you have to deal with being reminded that you came here for something completely unrelated. So, yeah, get used to that. Pathologic's not a game about getting answers or resolutions to your personal quests or even about being heroic. It's not a game about feeling safe or having fun. It's a game about Part 2, Futility and Disempowerment. You might be wondering why I'm reading the words out when they're on the screen, and that's because some people like to listen to these videos instead of watch them. I put a lot of effort into my visuals, but, you know, it's fine. So I think an important way of explaining the features and effects of this game is to talk about the first thing that they do to the player. You start the game in the house of Eva Yan, who's letting you sleep upstairs. She tells you that she's heard noises inside and there's some strange men hanging out in her car. Oh, I wonder how games work. This is a tutorial quest. RPGs sometimes have easy early quests that act as a sort of microcosm of the game, a tutorial for how various mechanics work. So you go outside and you're greeted by these strange boys. These aren't the characters hanging out in her garden. These are more tutorial figures. These are characters that pop up a lot in the game, tragedians and executors. These are their costumes, they're actors at the local theatre, performing plays and so on. But executors also perform important roles during the plague, like getting posted up outside the houses of the sick people to read their messages. Given that the game is already being framed as one large theatre performance with you as an actor, sometimes they break the fourth wall, like right now where they're telling you as living human beings live in the world. These characters teach you how basic mechanics work. Time advances and so you don't do the important things you're supposed to be doing. Other people will have to do them for you and might get sick, and you might need them not to get sick, so maybe don't let that happen. Your reputation is important, so don't start too many fights. Eat food so you don't starve and die, and so on. This game came out in like 2004, so the idea of having to eat and not die and time mechanics was actually pretty good. This is executed in an awesome way. Look at how this tutorial is framed. This conversation won't take too much of your time, especially since time stops during dialogues, and our dialogue is actually you need to know how to play after all. What are you talking about? I'm not a an actor. He doesn't understand what the tragedian means when the tragedian is talking past him to you, so that you know the mechanics, but the bachelor has no idea why someone's telling him this. Need I remind a wise man like you of the fact hunger is sated with food? Food can be found in shops. The bachelor is having the weirdest conversation of his life. The fourth wall breaking stuff in this game is genuinely the best. What's next? Ah yes, the side quest! So you go around to see about the men in Eva's garden and get a cutscene showing them, and you realise one of them is a creepy-looking, inhuman worm man. Great, another thing I'll have to figure out later, I guess. If you try to make them leave in a threatening way in dialogue, a fight starts. The way fights work in this game is you get beaten to death in a matter of seconds and the game is over. Oh jeez. Hello again, you two. Ah, no need to be so dramatic. Actually, no, that's your job, isn't it? In Pathologic, combat deliberately feels off. The game has fighting mechanics in the same sense that a car being driven off a cliff has flight mechanics. Punching is slow and plays a random animation with a different length before the attack actually goes off, and its range is highly deceptive. The range enemies have with their attacks is hard to decipher as well. It's very swimmy, like there's lag in a single-player game. You have to learn to intuit exactly when to close in for your attack to hit, and when to step back and not get killed. It's quite hard to be good at fighting in this game. The game does everything it can to stack the deck against you as you get to the fight. The muggers who spawn at night open their combat with you by throwing a knife at your face, which, no joke, deals like 90% of your health in a single hit. No one gets distracted by guards once they pick a target, they just keep going for you while the guards chase them and hit them in the back. And they seem to only reliably drop loot if you're the one who kills them. You can right-click to trigger a blocking animation, which is pretty cool. It doesn't actually do anything though. Guns are eventually an option. They kill in 1 or 2 hits, but bullets are super rare, they're really expensive, and you have a tendency to miss even when you're pointing the gun right at someone's head. I don't know, it just feels a little weird. But this actually works in the context of the gameplay because it further disincentivizes you in doing combat, because even sure bets like bringing a gun to a knife fight are never really that sure. Fighting always feels like a risk, and it instills that you're not really supposed to live through this game while getting in tons of fights. You're never handed satisfaction or enjoyment from fighting, which normally is the sort of thing that's the most visceral part of a game experience. The game knows this too, and likes to throw challenges designed to hurt you and not be satisfying right in your face. Once you're past the point in the game where you're very likely to have a revolver, a weapon with 6 shots before a very slow and vulnerable reloading animation, the side quest pits you against 7 guys, and you have to stand still to open the menu, which doesn't pause the game, to unequip it to switch to anything else. It's like the creators are laughing at you, seeing what deliberately weird, difficult thing they can put in front of you and have you still actually do it. This whole fight is optional, so really, it's your fault if you decide to try a dozen times to shoot 7 people with a gun with 6 chambers. Remember how I said early quests in games are like a tutorial? The lesson of this tutorial is you're gonna die if you make bad decisions. decisions. Heck, you're still probably gonna die if you make good decisions. Fighting is hard and punishing, especially against more than one person, and realistically you wouldn't be seeking out fights like this. You should be trying not to get killed first. A 2-on-1 fight in the first 2 minutes of the game before you know all the quirks of its combat is a death sentence, and the developers know it. They put this fight in here to teach the player lessons about how they should be thinking about the idea of fighting, or on the whole taking unnecessary risks. Death is cheap, and your health is expensive. I mean that literally too. How do you get health back? Simple. Just rest in a bed for a few hours and... Oh. No, that does nothing.
Actually, it just made everything worse. My hunger meter's gone up now.
Okay, I'll eat an egg and... Oh no, that's not gonna close my wounds. It's an egg. It made my hunger go down. But wait, it only made it go down a tiny amount. And that was all the food I could afford. Oh, I'm fucked! The only reliable way to heal is to take a painkiller like Meridol or Lidocaine. These are expensive, but they cause you to regain health over the course of a few in-game hours, which is agonizingly slow, but it works. They also cause a lot of exhaustion, which also raises over time while you're awake and causes you health damage if it maxes out, just like hunger.
There are items that heal you without any downsides, tourniquets and bandages, but they don't heal you that much. They're pretty hard to acquire, and they're worth enough money that you might as well just sell them and buy some more delicious eggs.
Basically, in this game, taking damage hurts. After retrying a few times, if you manage to kill the 2 people in this fight, the items they drop are barely worth the health you lost to get them. You get a couple of bullets, like literally a handful, and you don't even have a gun to use them with yet. If you used the weapon you started with in the fight, it's taken durability damage and is now already less effective, and you'll have to pay to get that repaired. Oh yeah, weapons lose durability and effectiveness in this game, and they do it super fast. This fight is barely worth doing. They're on the run from the law, whatever, they'll be on their way soon. It's their problem and they're not interested in you or Eva anyways. You can even ask them what the deal is with this guy. He's just one of the locals. Some of the people of this culture are just physically different for some reason. For me, the canon choice my bachelor made was to leave these guys alone. It's fine, it's not worth it. This opening is an exercise in disempowerment. You're not the main character of the story. I mean, first of all, there's literally 2 other main characters, but on a deeper level, you're not special, and sometimes you have to keep your head down to survive. You are nobody's hero.
Your character's stats page is a really helpful way of keeping up with all 8 of the chokeholds the game has you in.
Reputation goes down when you start fights, kill people or other generally immoral things, and goes up when you do good things, like in quests or killing muggers or giving money to the poor or medicine and alcohol to the sick. Not to cure them, but to help ease their pain so they can die in peace. A pretty morbid way of doing good. Despite being an RPG where you can get into fights with anyone you want in the street, a la Fallout or Elder Scrolls, the game has a very powerful ability to strongly incentivize that you don't do whatever you want. Not only do fights hurt, but your survival relies on you being accepted by society. If your reputation is too low, shopkeepers won't sell to you, and then you're kinda doomed to starve to death or to get sick to death or die to death.
Exhaustion just goes up over time and is reduced by sleeping.
But there are things like raw coffee beans and lemons which reduce exhaustion and give you more time to do things other than sleeping. But lemons increase your hunger and coffee decreases your health, just like in real life. But what's immunity and infection? Well, immunity is your ability to resist the plague.
Kind of? Not really.
When the plague becomes a factor, if you walk into a cloud of plague or get touched by a plague carrier or bitten by a rat, you get the plague. Your immunity defaults to 50%. There's expensive medicines you can take which increase it temporarily, but these also hurt you to use, and you have to use quite a few to raise your meter a useful amount. If the meter's absurdly high, and I mean close to 100%, and you're wearing a couple clothes that protect from infection, if you get hit by the plague, you might not get infected.
It'll just lower your immunity a bunch so you get infected the next time you touch something. Hooray! If you get infected, you start to lose health over time, and occasionally your camera gets all wobbly and distorted, and your infection level starts to raise non-stop, and as it gets higher, the effects will get worse. And if you get too infected, some NPCs will try to kill you with fire. There are antibiotics which decrease your infection level, but these also hurt you to take, and are also expensive, and don't actually stop the plague once you're infected. How do you cure the plague? You can't. Fuck you. Don't catch the plague, shithead. That's not really up for discussion, is it? It's a fucking plague. Plagues are really bad. Statistically, in Europe from 1200 to 1800, roughly 100% of all living people died of the plague. Okay, there are items that can cure the plague, but you really want to not be wasting those. The game's about curing the plague, so you kinda might want to not use those on your personal status effects. If you get infected, either load a save, or prepare to have one extra thing to worry about for the rest of the entire game. There's one other important meter you'll need to keep a close eye on as well. Time. The clock doesn't wait for you. Every day has a main quest, and you have to complete the quest on time, or someone else has to do your job for you. And they're not as good at your job, so...
The night has come. The most pressing endeavors of the day were fulfilled at the expense of several lives of your bound.
If you don't complete a quest in time, the story advances without you and one of your friends gets sick, which means you won't be able to talk to them unless you give up some of your medicine at the door to keep them upright for the day. Some quest lines take place at certain times too, so you need to keep an eye on things and plan ahead. Between all this and reputation, the game imposes a horrible feeling of dread on the player, a pressure that never really lets off. There are so many things to manage, to think about, just to stay alive. And that's not even getting into the story you're trying to progress while you do all this. You're always on the clock, and almost always need to be in two places at once. And as you navigate the town to get where you're supposed to be going, you get more and more aware of how slowly you walk. You can't run.
What do you
It's
require?
just this. It's horrible. You're not a character in a fun RPG, you're a person, traveling at frustratingly person-like speeds, trying to outrun about 8 different ways of dying. This is one of the first truly divisive things about the game. The walk speed is slow, and most of the game is about walking from place to place, walking to buy food, walking to buy medicine, walking to the trash can to find things to trade, walking to talk to people, and walking to the theatre to see it predict all the walking you're gonna do. Speaking of the theatre, every day after midnight they rehearse a new play. These often comment on what happened that day or predict the future in quite interesting ways.
People only fear bloodshed when it's their blood and their shed.
Yeah, that's right. Stay out of my shed. What the fuck are you talking about? And as the plague spreads, you start having to either take longer routes to avoid infected districts, or start risking infection and having to load saves and lose even more time. This is not fun. Or pretty. It's just walking. I've had people tell me the walking is what turned them off. It takes so long to get anywhere. Even if you're not in immediate danger because things are going well, you're still giving up a lot of your time going places. And the clock is still ticking down. So you're always racing, and you're always racing slowly. But this is also the point of the game in microcosm. It's not supposed to be fun on its own. Here's a head scratcher. Are games supposed to be fun? Maybe, but should they always
I'm
be?
listening.
Is that the only reaction games can or should explore creating in their players? Well, I think it's useful to at least experiment. This boredom isn't a bug, it's a feature. It adds even further to this sense of disempowerment. It also has a profound emotional effect. As you get increasingly aware of your impending doom and how limited your abilities to get things done really are, even walking around becomes tense and stressful. Pathologic is the subtlest survival horror experience I've ever played. The act of standing still in the game makes me nervous. I'm wasting time. Oh shit, it's 3 o'clock, I have to be somewhere. After a while, even the process of the travel starts to really get its hooks in you. Once you get used to it, there's nothing quite like it. As the story deepens and becomes more complex, the travel becomes an opportunity to think about what's happening, if you're being played, why you're being asked to do this, who it really benefits, whether someone's messing you around to waste your time and stop you figuring out what's really going on. The walking becomes the most engaging thing in the world. I've never been more alone with my own thoughts than when I was playing Pathologic. I'm one of the 2 remaining defenders of No Man's Sky, the others were lost in the Great Purge. But when it came out, I liked it at the time, almost primarily because it came closer than any other game to doing this. In fact, I made a reference to Pathologic in my little video about it, but in reality, Pathologic is still the absolute greatest at this and puts No Man's Sky to shame, especially when all the patches made it much more like what everyone else wanted, and much less like what I had enjoyed. Man, I should revisit that game. Imagine a game holding your attention not because anything in particular is happening, but entirely because it's got inside your your head. Oh, and then just to make sure you're paying attention, a plague cloud made of screaming skulls flies at you and you go, ah! The constant racing against the multitudinous clocks of time, exhaustion, and hunger, trying to get enough surplus stuff done to afford to manage it all, and the many ways you can be killed easily or survive, but with the game made even harder by taking damage or losing time or getting infected, or getting so desperate you decide to kill a guy in a dark alley for his food, is the exact opposite of a heroic fantasy story. At all times, the player feels powerless. Instead of the player being free, but with some survival mechanics to keep track of, it's flipped. The game is a large collection of things that will kill you unless you submit yourself to their whims. You're free, but you should be doing what you're supposed to be doing or you'll fail and die. You're placed under a level of constant stress maintaining your frail body while racing against time to actually get anything else done. You're always technically in control, but it's hard not to avoid the feeling that you're the one being played by the game, constantly reminded of all the things you don't have time to do, all the things you need to avoid, and worrying maybe the game's gonna come up with something new to stab you with on the next day. Which, Part 2.2, Day 2. I came up with the titles in this video to amuse myself. I don't really care what you think about them. Day 1 is kind of a walk in the park. You even have enough leeway to take a walk in some of the parks. You get used to the basic mechanics, buy and eat some food, progress the story a little, and meet some of the other characters, and at the end you realise that a plague might be about to hit. If you manage to survive day 1 and complete the quest, well, congratulations, you've done better than most players, but the real game hasn't started yet. Day 2 is the next big hurdle, and even less people make it past that. The Bachelor's Day 2 is where players will decide if this game is for them or not, and the drop-offs in terms of achievements demonstrate this pretty well. You'll know if the game is something you're going to try to continue with after this. So you make it to bed on time with a decent amount of money prepared in case you need to buy more things, and with all your meters sufficiently handled. Maybe everyone's warnings about how hard this game is were sufficient to prepare you, and you've got this in the bag now. On the morning of day 2, prices rise tenfold. The money you started the game with is no longer enough to buy a single delicious egg. The plague hasn't properly hit yet, but word's got out there's an outbreak coming, and people are stockpiling food and medicine. Not only is being able to afford food suddenly a much more pressing question than you expected, any food you do have on you doesn't seem like a good idea to eat. I mean, that's a lot of money you're holding. To make matters worse, the town's governor, Alexander Saburov, won't agree to do anything about the plague because he'll be seen to be overstepping the mark if the other rulers of the town don't agree on there being one. So a plague is starting, but no one with the power to take proper action will help because everyone has their own agenda. So you spend a good deal of the day with your hunger rising and no sure way to solve it because your money is worthless now, running around trying to find enough proof to get all three of these groups to agree there is a plague and to give Saburov the power to start making emergency orders. Your main quest is getting these warring factions to agree that the obvious problem exists. Along the way, you pick up 2 side quests. In one of them, you meet up with a former buddy of yours, Andrei Stomatin, and upon agreeing that the shit's hit the fan, or rather the town, you decide to get out while you can. But Andrei won't leave without his brother Peter, who doesn't want to leave that much, but Saburov, the guy who will get emergency powers anytime soon, bears a long-standing grudge against Peter which will probably lead to him getting killed once that happens. And this isn't unfounded, by the way. When Saburov does get emergency powers later in the game, he uses them to try to get Peter killed. So you need to get proof this is the case to get Peter to agree to leave with you both, which you get from talking to Maria Kane, Simon's niece, about this issue. However, if you tell her why you need to know this, she intervenes and prevents either of them from leaving, failing the quest. Unbeknownst to you, Maria needs these guys in the town for her own reasons, so don't do that. So you go to give this information to Peter. Ah, fuck! This is an actual recording of the first time I saw this statue. You can see in the footage that I freeze up. Like, it's terrifying. This is the second game ever to jump scare me with a fucking still object. It's genius. I can't wait to show you the other one sometime. That one's great too. You know which one I'm talking about. You all agree to meet at the train station at 10 PM. So you're starving and the town sucks, but at least you have an escape plan now. The second side quest is called The House of the Living. Several of the town's more charitable people have decided to establish a shelter for when the epidemic hits, and they each give you money to buy some food for the shelter before the prices rise any further. I will make the purchases. I have to do a lot of walking today anyway. The the money they give you is not enough to buy all the food they want, so you actually have to use whatever spare money you have or sell some of your items to afford this. You give up all your remaining money and items to get food you also need just to give it away, and you have to watch your hunger go up and your time go down as you rush around trying to find the stores with any bread or meat left. When you get it all, you're told the location of the shelter so you can deliver it. Let's just break this down. Part of a quest, on a day when food is incredibly scarce, involves carrying a ton of food somewhere and not eating it. It's actual torture running around watching that hunger meter go up and not knowing how you're going to resolve it, even though you're technically holding a solution the whole time. It's awkward and engaging and tense in a way that no game has achieved before or since. The game doesn't punish you for eating it either. You don't have to do this quest. You can just keep the food or the money you were given to buy it with and just ruin the chance to build the shelter. But you don't, because that's hardly what a doctor would do preparing for the plague. And maybe there's a reward for doing it, or it helps you further down the line. You're making a positive moral choice on a quest in a video game. You know how this works. There's something in it for you. So, you go to deliver the food. The house has already been hit by the plague. Everyone there is sick and dying, and the plague clouds will actively hunt you through the house if you stay too long. There's an executor there who tells you this mission was obviously a failure, so you leave and go back to the quest giver and give her all the food intended for the shelter. She gives you some nuts to tide you over as thanks for your hard work. The reward for successfully following this quest to the end is dramatically worse than the money or food you could have just run away with. At the very least, this quest results in finding proof of the plague, so the part of the main quest where you go in search of a plague-ridden house is at least solved by this too. If you do the main quest instead though, you get a genuinely terrifying encounter where as soon as you realize you've found a house filled with women who have the plague, once you try to leave, it spawns 2 more right where you just came from, and they try to grab you to appeal for help, and give you the plague if they do, and you just have to dodge past them. It's genuinely super scary and just emotionally awful. You're just abandoning these women to die. It's a horrible nightmare, which thankfully you cannot do if you did the House of the Living. Finally, Saburov has the power he needs to start establishing hospitals under quarantine, rationing food, distributing medicine, and so on. And he even gives you a gun. So it's a day late, but things are finally where they should have been already. Perhaps too late to prevent a full-on outbreak, but better than nothing at all. You can defend yourself a little better now, at least. Luckily, you're getting out of here soon. So 10 PM rolls around, your quests have been one major failure, and one minor resolution to a power squabble that you're sure will heat up again tomorrow, and you haven't eaten anything, so you head to the train station. When you get there, you find guards blocking the trains. The Samathin brothers are nowhere to be seen, they just didn't show up, and according to the guards, no one can enter or leave the town now because it's under quarantine thanks to the emergency powers you helped Saburov get. You just trapped yourself in the town. If you try to talk your way out, all the guards attack you, and you lose reputation for killing them because these guys were just doing their job. Best of all, there's an executor standing there. This one doesn't say anything, and seemingly can't be seen by the other characters. He just stares at you, letting you know he knows how dramatic the irony is, laughing at you for thinking you can just leave the town. So you're trapped, and you're starving. In the middle of the night, you go to see a play being rehearsed at the theatre. The play's about how you're fucked.
Bad news. The governor will abuse his power.
When the morning hits, the game nonchalantly says it all ends in less than 10 days. Exhausted from a day's being a pawn in someone else's power grab and scrambling for resources for a quest that was doomed, and starving half to death, you eat one of the nuts. Great. You're completely fucked, and you're on day 3. Day 2 is excellent game design. It's deeply engaging, watching your attempts to get anything at all done get frustrated, and it also sets a general tone for the game. It does the special game design trick that I like to call recontextualizing. Players come to games with their own expectations and understandings of how a game is supposed to work and feel and play, a certain general set of ideas about what all this is supposed to be like. If you're playing an open-world RPG, you know what dialogue trees, shops, trading and hunger and time mechanics and moral choices are, and you think you know how they work. Day 1 partially plays into this. It takes pains to show how fragile you are and all the work you have to do to not die, but it's doable, it makes sense, it doesn't feel that much different from a normal game. When the prices rise so massively that money is effectively worthless, and you were given no warning this would happen, everything about how you relate to the game experience is thrown out the window, and you feel that happening in your brain as you play and realize what just happened. Walking around while slowly starving, getting rid of the rest of your own items to try to get the food for a doomed quest, carrying food you can't eat around, and wondering when you will get to eat, and watching your meters inevitably rise as you race to help the town and only barely achieve anything, you start to make realizations about the scope of this experience. You weren't playing a game with the mechanic where you have the option of using money to buy things. You were playing a game about having no money. You weren't playing a game where you have to eat food to survive. You were playing a game about starving. You weren't playing a game where you can choose what sort of morals you have. You were playing a game about how betraying the people who trust you is better for you than trying to be a hero, and doing the right thing is an exercise in getting your time and energy and money wasted. Survival horror RPG? Lies. You are playing a pain simulator. This is a deeply masterful trick I've seen very few developers pull, where commonly understood mechanics are twisted in such a fashion as to force the player into a specific mindset and relationship with those mechanics, and everything straightforward suddenly becomes different and off. Once day 2 happens, you no longer have any idea what's coming. Money turning out to be virtually useless, the growing threat of the plague, who knows how bad things will get in the next few days. Even though the game doesn't get that much harder, and technically the game isn't that hard if you know what you're doing, this sequence of experiences fills you with dread for what might happen next. And the game doesn't stay this difficult forever. The point isn't how hard the game actually is if you measure it objectively, the point here is how the game makes you engage with it. The game has a reputation of being depressingly punishing and difficult, and while all this is true in places, and it does get very hard in brief bursts, the fact the game manages to create this reputation without always being hard is a serious credit to its execution. Day 2 grinds you, and even if things pick up for you, or you master the art of stabbing bad men for extra cash, you will never really feel in control again. And that is genius design. One of the ways you can make surviving slightly easier is to sell your gun. The gun you just got is worth a lot of money, and so are bullets, which might be good for solving some of the more pressing issues of the game. You don't get in that many fights, especially if you're avoiding them, but being put in a position where the best chance of survival is getting rid of one of the main things a first-person shooter is known for, it's even in the name, that's a notable thing. Almost everyone I know who made it this far sold their first gun, allowed themselves to remain vulnerable for the chance to maybe not die of something else. You can also learn to hold on to certain objects to trade for better things. In trash cans you can find all kinds of stuff. Sometimes people throw out jewelry or needles or empty bottles, which you can refill with water for free and drink to reduce hunger and increase exhaustion, or save up to trade for bandages with the town drunks. The children in the town will trade flowers or nuts or blades for various useful things like medicine and bullets. So the nuts you got were useful, you just might not have learned their value. And this is another bigly clever thing the game does. The economy isn't as simple as I give you money and you give me my delicious egg. It's a web of needs and wants from a variety of NPCs which informs the value of myriad different items, which you can benefit from if you pay attention and learn. The game never hands any of this to you, and that makes discovering and using these things feel good, like you've worked it out and solved something. One type of child in the town, this little girl, sometimes, very rarely, has an item on her called Schmauder. They're expensive to trade for, but they're worth it. If you use it, it reduces your health to almost nothing, but it cures the plague. There's a very limited amount of real cures available throughout the story, so getting your hands on some of these is a real help. Even if their downsides are too much for you to risk using, other people will pay thousands and thousands of rubles for them, almost $50 worth, and hey, maybe some of your friends might need curing later, just saying. This all works in the context of the story too. The bachelor is in a foreign town whose customs aren't like the ones he's used to, and so are you. And all this tension and storytelling happens largely while you're just walking from place to place in a town. It's quite an experience, and this experience is enhanced by the music, which is some of the best in the business. It takes a front seat during a lot of the walking, and it does excellently with that spotlight. needs to be, it's strange and unsettling. It feels at the same time natural and alien, like you're witnessing a normality that isn't familiar to you personally. Synths are used alongside more naturalistic drums and rhythms to further destabilize the setting. The music even evolves with the story. Each main region of the town has a theme, and when that area gets infected, it changes and becomes even more strange and distorted. On top of the slightly remixed original music, you can now hear a distant and frenzied chanting. It's great, and some of the tracks sound subtly different from different characters, which is awesome. The opening theme is a real banger too. Except, it sounds oddly familiar. I can't quite put my finger on. Oh damn it, part 3. The writing. By now, if you've been pausing to read the text, you'll be very aware of how strange the writing is. And whenever you begin dialogue with someone, they actually say something out loud.
When we do not find peace of mind in ourselves, it is useless to seek it elsewhere.
Truth does not do as much good in the world as the appearance of truth does evil.
Oh wow, that's a good quote. I'm going to use that in a future video and pretend a philosopher said it. Watch out for that. Everyone's very wordy and flowery, talking about their dreams and visions, and sometimes it's hard to tell if you're discussing philosophy instead of the task at hand. The game has a very specific writing style, one more evocative of your typical novel than other games, and it is, in my opinion, very well written. It succeeds in making you feel transported to a world where things aren't as simple as they seem, where dream and metaphor are entangled with reality. If a sentence feels strange or hard to follow, it's doing that on purpose to make you feel weird, like you have to put effort into understanding. Instead of simply telling you you're a small part of a strange universe, it makes you feel that way by refusing to pull its punches with the ideas it's meditating on. Try this on for size. Do you believe in prophecies, Andres Tomatin?
It depends. I agree this may seem inconsistent with materialism. On the other hand, when your own experience convinces you to their effectiveness, you have to take them into account.
I wonder that myself. For a moment, I thought he was driven by the same feeling that I am. A great man, when unexpectedly betrayed by the people he loves, will often seek to fill the whole universe with his blind spite. Yes, the feeling is indeed familiar.
No one talks out loud like this in real life, but that's not a mistake, it's part of the point. You're stuck in a world where people do talk like that, and have to untangle it to make sense of things. It's very hard to call this game pretentious, because not only does pretentious mean affecting a greater importance than is actually possessed, and the game definitely does say important things, but it's also too self-aware about how all this looks, and it loves to make fun of itself. The plays make fun of the characters and plot and writing style. The cool fourth wall-breaking executors complain about how unwieldy their outfits are. It's lovely stuff. While this video is definitely going to spoil lots of the plot, there's lots of really interesting aspects I won't have time to go into detail about. If you want a more complete breakdown and analysis of the three characters' stories, YouTuber Solmatul made a great video doing so, linked in the description. There's such a ridiculous amount of depth and complexity that it still astounds me now, and even trying to cover all of it is beyond my powers. When I was talking about this with Mandalore Gaming, whose video on Pathologic is also really worth checking out, he offhand mentioned an entire aspect of one of the characters I'd completely forgotten about, and isn't even in Soul's video either. This game is about as dense with story as a real novel, with an equivalent amount of words to read. Obviously, really getting across the cumulative feel of the writing style is hard to do in video form, and I was never really good at book reports anyway, so instead I'll talk about some of the more specific storytelling techniques that help the game achieve what it's going for. Firstly, the constant use of deception. Other characters lie to you for all kinds of reasons, or have access to incomplete information and then share it unreliably. There's lots of manipulation and hearsay going on, and it's left to you to figure out what's actually happening. Every character in this game has their own end. Why does Maria Kane want to keep the Stomatins in town? Why does the Inquisitor seem to always want to investigate the polyhedron and find an excuse to destroy it? Did Olgimsky lock up the Termitary to prevent the plague getting in? Or has it already...
this time? Mine, however, is not to question why, but instead to do as the Dark Lady bids. Disappointing? I was hoping that I'd be feeding you to my hounds instead. Well, at least they'll have something to eat.
Gundam to watch, and I actually took a picture on my phone of the funniest thing about this experience, which was when the most understandable sentence I'd read so far was a character apologizing for if they don't make much sense. I was like, yeah, thanks. So I stopped. Then a couple of years later I tried again, pushed past my initial problems, hated being alone with my thoughts when I was walking around the town, because most of my thoughts were about how good Turn A Gundam was, and basically did such a bad job I was dying over and over on day 2 and realised I'd have to go back. So I spent years agreeing with critics, convinced of their arguments that games could do more things than be viscerally entertaining or mechanically fun, despite failing to play the central game many used in their example of the value of negative experiences. It was too...